You've heard a lot about our failing institutions on this program. We now know the FBI is riddled with incompetent partisan hacks. The intelligence community seems to exist mostly to spy on you and leak information about politicians it dislikes. Your state and local governments are full of bureaucrats who are paid more to deliver less every year and then retire with a fat pension in their 50s. Academia, meanwhile, is apparently dominated by lazy mediocrities more interested in political activism than in teaching. There is a lot of rot in our halls of power, but our federal courts may be the most decayed institution of all, though they receive very little attention. Under the last two administrations, the courts increasingly have come to see themselves not as interpreters of the law, their constitutional role, but as the country's main policymakers. Consider, for example, what's been happening with DACA. Now, as a factual matter, it is indisputable that any president has the authority to end DACA. The program was a creation from whole cloth of the Obama administration. It has no legal basis. Actual federal law says that illegal immigrants are to be deported from this country, not given legal residency or work permits. The Obama administration simply chose to ignore that law, citing the right of prosecutorial discretion. Now, that argument could be valid, theoretically, though we are skeptical, but here's what we know. If Obama can choose to ignore the law, it is obvious the Trump administration has the right to enforce the law passed by Congress. And yet left-wing judges disagree. Several have ruled already it is somehow illegal to end DACA. Their justification for this is legally ludicrous. Last month, San Francisco District Court Judge William Alsup blocked the end of DACA nationwide. He said getting rid of it was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. As part of his ruling, Alsup simply asserted that DACA should continue because it was, quote, in the public interest. In other words, the judge likes the program, therefore ending it is illegal. Last week, another judge, Judge Nicholas Garifas in New York, ruled that DACA can't be eliminated because the administration has not provided a valid reason for eliminating it, as if following the law were not enough. And it's not the first bizarre ruling from that judge. In 2010, Garifas ordered the New York Fire Department to use racial quotas for hiring rather than merit in order to achieve some goals he had in mind, and the results were immediate. Injuries in the fire department went up. The dropout rate of firemen in that class surged from 10% to 24%. In a later reversal, an appeals court said that Garifas's bias was so obvious and so severe that parts of the case had to be assigned to a new judge. And yet, of course, Garifas is still on the bench. He and a lot of judges like him. In Michigan, a judge has blocked the deportation of convicted Iraqi criminals from this country, citing the alleged danger they would face if they returned to their own country. In New York, a judge released an illegal immigrant criminal prior to deportation, claiming he had a constitutional right to, quote, say goodbye. In Florida, a judge blocked the deportation of nearly 100 Somalis because of the conditions on the airplane that would fly them home. For real, that happened. This sort of thing is actually commonplace now. In the name of progressive resistance to the president, anything can be declared unconstitutional, and is. For example, it's been settled law pretty much forever that a president has the power to exclude foreigners from the country based on security concerns. But in the past year, multiple judges have ignored this and struck down the administration's travel bans. Some have taken the legally meaningless position that the bans were unconstitutional because of things Trump said on the campaign trail. Judge James Wynn of the Fourth Circuit compared the president's travel ban to FDR's internment of the Japanese, American citizens of Japanese descent, during the Second World War. That's not legal analysis, it's political punditry. Get that man a CNN contract. For more than 200 years, the U.S. military determined who could serve in uniform based in part on which medical conditions might negatively affect a person's ability to fight wars. And there are a lot of them. That makes sense, of course. It's no longer the law, thanks to judges. In his final months in office, President Obama declared that the military must admit transgendered soldiers, regardless of the effect on military readiness. That was a political decision, obviously, but thanks to activist judges, it is now a constitutional right somehow. Judges Marvin Garbus of Maryland and Colleen Collar-Cottley of the District of Columbia have ruled that it's unconstitutional to bar transgendered volunteers from service. Garbus's ruling went on to order the government to cover gender reassignment surgery at taxpayer expense. These judges are not interpreting the law, much less enforcing it. They are inventing the law. They reject the core idea of democracy, which is a country whose policies are determined by its citizens, its voters. The judges are in control, no matter what you want or who you voted for. Increasingly, the elected branches of government are irrelevant. And this is especially true on the issue of immigration, as we said. In the 1980s, a limited amnesty for farm workers was supposed to end in 1988. The courts ruled it had to be extended further. And as a result, thousands of additional people were given amnesty they weren't supposed to receive. Lawmakers were ignored. In the 1990s, California voters overwhelmingly passed Proposition 187 that denied state social services to people here illegally. Courts gutted that law without even allowing it to take effect. And now California's entire middle class is fleeing the state because illegal immigration has made it a dystopia suitable only for the very poor and the very rich. That's exactly what voters didn't want, but the vote didn't care. So how long before some judge on the Ninth Circuit, for example, decides illegal aliens have the right to vote in our elections because, well, just because? You can laugh if you want, but on some level you know that's coming, because it is. In a functioning constitutional republic, judges are essential. Their job is to restrain politicians from trampling our core governing principles. And by core governing principles, we mean the ones written in the Constitution, not on the New York Times editorial page or at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Our system has worked well for hundreds of years, but it's breaking apart, and it's breaking apart because of judicial integrity. There isn't enough of that. If you find yourself arguing that the Constitution does not contain the right to keep and bear arms, but does contain a right to abortion, you're lying. That's not a difference of interpretation, it's dishonesty. One is in the text, one is not. Right now, this is happening almost exclusively on the left, but it's not hard to imagine conservatives doing it too. Why wouldn't they after a while? What happens when Republican-appointed judges start striking down laws a Democratic Congress passed on taxes or health care, the environment, abortion, you name it, simply because they don't like them? The judiciary will lose whatever honor it once had. It will become a political weapon. That has happened in a lot of countries, and it's a disaster every time. Judges who misuse their power ought to be called to account. They're not gods. They're government officials who work for us. And when they're corrupt or dishonest, they ought to face the same criticism as politicians or bureaucrats. Abraham Lincoln understood this. He accused the High Court's Chief Justice of plotting to spread slavery throughout America. Lincoln is praised by historians for doing that because he was right. But when this administration points out judicial malfeasance, and there's a lot of it, the ruling class responds with howls. That's an attack on democracy, they say.
I find these attacks on the judiciary absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable.
I'll be honest, I don't understand language like that. We don't have so-called judges. We don't have so-called senators. We don't have so-called presidents.
So-called judge. Is it appropriate for the president to be questioning the legitimacy of a federal judge in that way? Doesn't that undermine the separation of powers in the Constitution written right next door?
They're lying to you, as they always are. It's not anti-democratic to demand that the public's views should fundamentally shape public policy. That's the essence of democracy itself.